Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mindy Raquant podcast. I am your host, Mindy Raquant, and today we are going to be talking about suffering and how to honor and glorify God in all of that. This is a question that I see quite a bit, and people tend to wonder if God actually loves them and cares about them in their suffering, and how can a loving God I don't really like to use the word allow, but allow suffering. And so we're just going to delve into that today and explore how that works. So the first thing I'm going to say is that in this topic especially, you have to be willing to let down your walls. You have to be willing to open your heart and your mind to a different idea, perhaps to a new idea of a God who you may not have known before, because a lot of us have grown up in relationships, in environments where the God of the Bible was presented in a way that was cold, distant, maybe only wanting you to perform for him, and that is so far from the from the idea of who God truly is, from the character of the God who really truly is in the Bible. So you're just going to have to open your heart, and you're going to have to explore the truth about God for who he really is and not for who you always thought he was. So I know that it hurts to be vulnerable and it hurts to open yourself up to something new, but that's just what we have to do if we want to actually find healing and if we actually want to understand who he is. So this topic of suffering starts with the biblical foundation, and that goes all the way back to the very beginning. So I'm going to get my Bible here. I have it open to Genesis chapter 3. So in the beginning, when God created the world, it was all perfect and everything was as it should be. And the serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild animals. And if you grew up in church, you would know the story of how he deceived the woman and she ate the fruit. And so Adam and Eve, if you don't know that story, you can go ahead and read it in Genesis chapter 3. But Adam and Eve, they forfeited their connection with God in order to become like God. Eve wanted to be powerful. And so when I was reading that story, I just realized, I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, in that moment of temptation where Eve was just so tempted to reach out and take that forbidden fruit, where was God? Where was he in all of that? Where was he in her story? Did she say, oh, God doesn't see me doing this. He's not here right now. He doesn't really care what I do. Did God go back to heaven? Did he just sit back on his throne and take a nap? Was he just ignoring Eve? Did he miss something? And that's how a lot of us feel in our stories. We tend to think that in our moments of temptation, in our moments of struggle, in our moments of pain, where's God? Did he just miss us? Did he just forget about us? Is he just up in heaven taking a nap, just relaxing? And, he's God. He can do whatever he wants. He doesn't have to care. He doesn't have to see us. And so I think that's what a lot of us think about God. But I think that in that moment, no, I don't just think, I know, in that moment, he saw Eve and he was watching her to see what choice that she would make. He wasn't just turning a blind eye to her. This is what he allowed Eve to do, because when he created Adam and Eve, he gave them the choice of whether or not they would choose to serve him. And this wasn't God's fault. He created us to have free will. If we can choose to serve God, then we can choose to not serve him as well. And so the connection between free will and love is that God gives us the freedom to choose. If he actually loves us, then he's not going to force us to love him. God's love allows us to not love him back. If we don't want to, we have to want to love him back. And so that's the connection between suffering in here, because a lot of us make choices that don't honor God, and that's where pain and suffering comes in. Suffering always comes from a fallen world. It is caused by us being allowed to choose a way that is not God's way. If God would force us to choose his way, there wouldn't be any suffering, but then there wouldn't be any love. There wouldn't be any choice to love him, and so we would just be mechanical robots. Suffering is a symptom of our overall sin. And I do not believe that Christians are exempt from suffering. Yes, Jesus takes care of our sin, but we are still in this fallen world and we suffer along with everyone else. And I'm going to turn to Romans chapter 8, and I'm going to read Romans 8, verses 15 through 25. So you have not received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves. Instead, you received God's Spirit when he adopted you as his own children. Now we call him Abba, Father, for his Spirit joins with our spirit to affirm that we are God's children. And since we are his children, we are his heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs of God's glory. But if we are to share his glory, we must also share his suffering. Yet what we suffer now is nothing compared to the glory he will reveal to us later. For all creation is waiting eagerly for that future day when God will reveal who his children really are. Against its will, all creation was subjected to God's curse. But with eager hope, the creation looks forward to the day when it will join God's children in glorious freedom from death and decay. For we know that all creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. And we believers also groan, even though we have the Holy Spirit within us as a foretaste of future glory, for we long for our bodies to be released from sin and suffering. We too wait with eager hope for the day when God will give us our full rights as his adopted children, including the new bodies he has promised us. We were given this hope when we were saved. If we already have something, we don't need to hope for it. But if we look forward to something we don't yet have, we must wait patiently and confidently. So, in those verses, there is so much hope. We're not victims of suffering. And the thing that I see as well is, what does suffering do? What does God do with suffering? And what are we supposed to do with suffering as God's children? So we have to define suffering. There are different kinds. There's general suffering, such as trafficking and war and kids starving, which is horrible. And these things are hard to understand and accept. But I want to make this very, very clear that those things are not a reflection of God's heart. And if we look in Scripture, I'm going to read Psalm 34, verses 17 through 18. The Lord hears his people when they call to him for help. He rescues them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those whose spirits are crushed. And I'm going to read Psalm 68, verses 5 through 6. Father to the fatherless, defender of widows, this is God whose dwelling is holy. God places the lonely in families. He sets the prisoners free and gives them joy. For those who are vulnerable and hurt from ungodly authorities, we know that God will bring justice to those authorities. Psalm 103, verse 6, the Lord gives righteousness and justice to all who are treated unfairly. And this is so important that we know that we cannot let our view of God be shaped by anything less than himself. If you're looking at authorities, if you're looking at the person who hurt you and saying that God is exactly like that person, then know that you're believing a lie, because God is not like people. He is entirely separate from those who have hurt you, and he is not like those who have hurt you. And this is where we have to open ourselves up and let him show himself to us. You have to ask him who he is and let him show himself to you in a way that you've never seen him before. If you let your view of God be shaped by the fact that there is so much suffering and pain, then of course you're going to question his love. But if you allow his character to shape your perspective and give you hope, then you'll be confident that his love was never a question. I'm going to repeat that last sentence. But if you allow his character to shape your perspective and give you hope, then you will be confident that his love was never a question. His love requires you to make a choice, and since without him we're all sinners, then we're allowed to make choices that hurt others, and that's why there's suffering. And as far as how God uses suffering, suffering is a tool, and he uses it to teach us. It's more about our response to it than anything. A wise parent understands that pain can be a wonderful teacher. And I'm not talking about beating your kids. That's not what I'm talking about. But a child who is never required to stretch themselves and grow and become uncomfortable will not reach their full potential. It's through suffering that we learn the most. It's always when you go through hard times that you come out on the other side of it and you realize that you've grown the most in that season. So 1 Peter 4, verses 12 through 13. Dear friends, don't be surprised at the fiery trials you are going through, as if something strange were happening to you. Instead, be very glad, for these trials make you partners with Christ in his suffering, so that you will have the wonderful joy of seeing his glory when it is revealed to all the world. We shouldn't act like we are entitled to a suffering-free life. We do not get a get out of jail free card in this life. We do not need to have a comfortable, easy life. That's not what we're here for. And we're actually created to face challenges and overcome. We're created to choose the right response. Jesus did not bring physical earthly comforts from heaven to earth. He didn't even have a nice house. He didn't have a nice bed. He didn't even have a place to sleep at night. He suffered to the point of death. And so when I'm going through hard times, I just remember what all Jesus did for me, and my suffering pales in comparison to what he did for me. So Hebrews 5 verses 8 through 9 says, even though Jesus was God's son, he learned obedience from the things he suffered. In this way, God qualified him as a perfect high priest, and he became the source of eternal salvation for all those who obey him. The suffering of Jesus qualified him to be a perfect source of salvation for the world. So, what is your suffering setting you up to be? Who is God making you through your pain? And this was instrumental to me in transforming my mindset about pain and suffering. Pain equals calling. The amount that you suffer is the amount that you can help others, and it's often those who've gone through the most who can help others the most because of everything that they've been through. So it's really about your lens, your perspective, and your mindset. So I have 3 mindsets that I will share with you that can help you understand how to look at suffering. The first is eternity versus earthly. The second is faith versus doubt. And the third is forgiveness versus bitterness. So eternity versus earthly. This world is not my final destiny. My heart is set on heaven because that's where the highest love of my life dwells. And I love him so much that I'm willing to sacrifice the comfort of this life in order to experience everything in heaven for eternity. And a little side note, he has promised to provide everything we need here on earth as well. And I can testify that even though we've been through a lot in the last year or so, I have not lacked my physical needs being met. So, anyways, side note. And then the second mindset, faith versus doubt. I choose to have faith to believe that God is working everything for good, and that's found in Romans 8 verse 28, and that he is a good God and that he has my best interests in mind. And then the third mindset, forgiveness versus bitterness. I choose to forgive those who may have hurt me, whether it was intentional or not, because God forgives my sin if I choose to forgive. But if I choose bitterness, he actually won't forgive me, and that's found in Matthew 6:14 through 15. So if you want to do some homework, there are some chapters that you can read. Psalm 103, Romans 8, and 1 Peter 1. Those are some of my favorite passages to read and helping me wrap my mind around the truths that God has in his word about suffering and how we are supposed to view it and my role in that, and how he does his work in my heart through all of that. So there is a path to healing, and it's hard, but it is harder to be a bitter person than it is to become a better person. So anyways, that is all that I have to share with you guys today on this topic, and I hope that you understand better what God is doing in your heart through all of this. And thank you so much for listening, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.